Hey, I am going to do a quick check-in on the University of Metaphysics coursework material. Same as last time, just do a quick reading plus commentary on where I'm at in studies. I'm on the master's program currently, and this section here that I'm going to share is really interesting. One of my favorite topics. There's a lot of favorite topics, but this one's on the collective unconscious. So it's extremely relevant always, but especially kind of right now, whenever you have times where there are big ideas or big concepts that are sweeping people into different corners, more division or more labeling or more identities that are being formed. Um, it's an interesting thing to watch overall because you see that these ideas sort of take shape and then sweep away into sort of crazes that could be beneficial or detrimental to us. So as a metaphysician, we're learning about these topics to understand the psychology of them and then the underlying meaning of them. What is the first cause of what causes a person to be swept into activity or swept into a craze or a phenomenon of thinking, a manner of thought that kind of takes on a mind of its own. So that's kind of the things that we'll be touching on. I'll share the screen to show the reading along with this. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you're doing well and that this one's not too long. So let's jump in and go ahead and get started. All right, so this is part 3 of the master's degree program, still in section 1 where we're talking about the metaphysical psychology of consciousness. And this section is called, again, the collective unconscious. So I'll start reading. Reference was made earlier to the mystical research of Dr. Carl Jung. While conducting this research, he formulated a concept of a level of the mind that he called the collective unconscious. This contribution to Western psychology was perhaps the greatest gift the world-renowned psychologist could have given to those of us in metaphysics. For although stated in psychological terms, many of Jung's theories give added acceptance to the innumerable ideas of the nature of the mind, as espoused by mystics and metaphysicians down through the ages. I think I read that in a way that wasn't too clear, so let's do it again because that's a really good sentence. It's important. For although, pause, I got a lot of energy today. I think it's from wearing yellow. Like the sun is beaming into me and it's really hot outside too. To the point. For although stated in psychological terms, many of Jung's theories give added acceptance to the innumerable ideas of the nature of the mind, as espoused by mystics and metaphysicians down through the ages. What does this mean? This means from back to the beginning of time in the study of psychology, there were things that were warded off as woo-woo, right? What we talk about today, and I'm going to address that in a minute because that's one of my pet peeves. So what this is saying is that Jung was probably the greatest gift to psychology in terms of metaphysicians because he gave credence to part of that, the studies that's unseen. So the psychology of the mind, the mental space, and in his studies of Eastern philosophy, he brought in a lot of the mystical, metaphysical teachings and brought them and made them mainstream in to introduce it to Western psychology, which was really kind of boxy and I guess you would say infantile in its understanding. So it's very elementary, just like how we come here and we don't honor nature and the land like native cultures do. It's that same vibe. It's like acting like, oh, I know everything because I know everything that my five senses bring to the equation. And then you have all of these ancient cultures from the beginning of time showing you that no, there's an exchange happening, an energy flow, and you can become in harmony with that to expand yourself and your life in so many ways. But if you choose to just see what's only, in your five senses, then that's your prerogative, but you are not at a more advanced state because of that. You are kind of at a understanding. Same, we always talk about understanding, understanding, overstanding. So they're kind of in the beginning. So Jung advanced psychology, Western psychology, by introducing some Eastern teachings, and that was really cool. That's what it's saying here. Continuing on the next paragraph. It is not the intent of this module to go into every fine detail of Jung's theories. That will be left to the reader. Should you wish to pursue his philosophy, volumes of books on Jung's concepts can be found today in most large bookstores and libraries. The basic synopsis of Jung's ideas is as follows. Inside every human mind, there is a level of the mind that deals with change or transformation. As an example, when a die-hard atheist of many years becomes an ardent believer, we can say that this is indeed a momentous change in the personality structure of that individual. Their behaviors start to change, right? The personality starts to morph to a different set of characteristics that represent this new identity label. An atheist behaves a certain way, a believer behaves a certain way because there's these thought forms and ideas behind these concepts. And Jung said that such change or transformation has taken place in what he called the collective unconscious level of the mind. Why does it? Why does a label come with a collection of thoughts, behaviors, attitudes? And it's for a spiritual reason. It's not by happenstance. There's an energy behind the labels or the archetypes that we give, and we assign them sometimes completely unconsciously. Jung believed in what he called archetypes of the unconscious. These archetypes are powerful idea energies existing in very deep levels of a person's mind. So this is going to be a key point here. They're idea energies. So powerful are these archetypes that they have the power to rule over the attitudes, opinions, and desires of the more surface levels of the mind. So this is our conscious, thinking, where we're just what we understand and how we reflect out these bigger idea energies, how we show them to the world. A change or transformation of the controlling archetype at a deep level of the mind causes a dramatic change in the surface personality. The tie-in to metaphysics is that Jung regarded these archetypes as almost gods or goddesses of the unconscious. This also parallels deep meditational experience, as in the case of a meditator who may psychically see visions of what can only be described as gods or goddesses. It goes on to describe that further in terms of mythology, where it says, mythology contains some hidden truth in its symbology. There are the so-called good gods and goddesses and the so-called bad ones. This could explain people's seemingly good and bad surface mental attitudes. When they make contact with a certain energy that lies deep within them, then they have surface mental attitudes that reflect that archetype or that idea energy. A more personalized example might be as follows. One of Jung's archetypes was termed the temptress. Such an unconscious controlling archetype would call a soul inhabiting a male body, for example, to be attracted to a woman with a dubious background. Once the temptress was changed over to another archetype, the fascination for this type of woman would be lost. And this part right here is particularly interesting in terms of traits of appetite or desire and things like that. It's very much similar to kind of what the spiritual healing modalities do with hypnosis and therapies that reprogram a person's addictions or desires or things like that, where certain lanes would say that you're just hardwired to a certain thing or have a proclivity towards something. Well, on a deeper level, you have activated the archetype of that thing or the idea energy that desires this thing. And there's many cases where a person shifts a large or a very profound connection with something completely and can leave it and walk away with no desire for it. Just in the case on the previous page of the atheist becoming a believer, you would never equate those two until that shift happens. And what's saying here is that deep idea energy or archetype shifted and it changed, and it came with a new set of attitudes, opinions, and desires for the person. And in this case of the temptress, a man, for example, who's attracted to that type of individual could completely overnight lose that fascination once that archetype or that idea energy is deactivated. And there's a number of ways metaphysically to introduce one of these transformations, these kinds of deep transformations. Many religious symbols seen psychically in visions would also fall into the realm of the collective unconscious and could be considered archetypes or transformation symbols of the collective unconscious. What we as metaphysicians can glean from this is that the changeover of controlling archetypes of the collective unconscious is part of an evolutionary growth process of the mind. This also happens not in terms of those extremes, believer or non-believer, or types of relationship attractions. It's also on a scale of the human evolution, like we were talking about in the last video of the fifth ray for Alice Bailey. If we think about human evolution in terms of the evolution of consciousness or the evolution of the mind, it's a growth process where we advance in different stages, and that matches up just in terms of life stages. When you're a baby to a teenager to an adult to an adult in your later years, what different attitudes, opinions, and desires come with each stage of that growth process of the mind. It's linked to some sort of collective unconscious that is shared for a nation. You could see a different country of all teenagers in a certain country behaving a certain way. It's the same with like styles and trends that go in and out of fashion. It's things like that that are collected to these archetypes that are basically idea energies that we really kind of could add value by putting more focus on that so that people can understand a lot of their convictions are inherited or adopted and not truly intrinsically held, and how to awaken their consciousness by analyzing the adopted attitudes, thoughts, and behaviors of a certain archetype that they've adopted or that they've labeled themselves as, and then using consciousness to broaden their understanding and kind of cause less harm, as you'll see in the bigger picture, that we are doing by just living kind of vicariously by these unconscious controlling archetypes, which I think is really interesting. In addition, when people seek to consciously improve themselves or others, in truth, they are seeking to evolve the mind to its next plateau of awareness. So same thing with metaphysical teachings and healers. When you have someone that comes to you that wants to improve themselves or wants to start the work of healing others, they want to evolve the mind of the person, or they want to personally evolve their own mind to a next plateau of awareness. It's not to say that where they were was wrong or anything like that. It's just a desire to be at a different stage of knowing, which is the point of everything. It's okay to know that we once didn't know something. If you allow that to happen, then you are more open to having some of these major religious or spiritual experiences where it doesn't have to be collected to a religion per se, but in the same way that an atheist who is born again because they finally have that recognition or that experience of something greater, of meaning, of value, and it really releases them and makes them feel so alive that they become so devout and then connected to all these egregors, which we'll talk about in a second. Maybe they could backstep that and understand that what happened was they reached a new plateau of awareness, and then they can consciously collect which attributes, attitudes, opinions, and desires from that new label or level that they've achieved, rather than just kind of arbitrarily collecting a mind or point of view that's unconscious, part of a hive mind or something, which we'll talk about as well. So this is almost over. The profound idea in all of this is that there has to be a ruling intelligence, ultimate in its presence, that is behind the various transformational changes that must take place for the evolution of the mind. An ultimate presence rules the mind, hence is the God of the mind, or as Christ put it, the Father within. And this is kind of this idea of a ruling intelligence is kind of what I was talking about too when I was mentioning a hive mind, because there's a ruling intelligence that is pure, which is the God source mind that this is talking about, but there's also kind of an artificial intelligence rising, kind of like in line with the artificial intelligence rising in our actual day-to-day reality. It's that same as above, so below philosophy. You're going to see like fictitious representations in our outer world of what's actually happening in the inner realm of the whole evolution of humanity as a whole. You'll see this society having a mirroring mini evolution in its own, grappling with these same ideas. So do we adopt a mindset that comes from this expansive, embracing, empowering source that is our source and that is available to all of us, or do we attach to this artificial ruling intelligence that is like a hive mind that can limit us, cause us to behave reactively, impulsively, meanly, coldly, things like that, very artificial. So, and that's what happens a lot when we link on to different labels and label others and treat them as very separate, which is the opposite of consciousness, unity consciousness, which brings us together. This is the work of the metaphysician to kind of share these things. Let me jump back. These things that help people evolve to the next plateau of awareness, which is really cool. So ending here with the psychic level of the mind. What the academic community once frowned upon as the vague or charlatanic imaginings of metaphysicians is now accepted as fact, i.e. extrasensory perception, ESP, does in fact exist. And I love this because it says it so eloquently, because this is what people call woo-woo. And again, this is one of my triggers because I don't openly usually talk about my views or what I study or what I'm doing in the hive mind, which is like the greater world, unless I'm in a safe space or with people that have studied it, because a lot of people have been taught. One of the hives is to dismiss that which you don't understand, right? So it's labeled as woo-woo, and I'll put up those definitions real quick and run through them. What that means is literally that it has not been founded in a scientific fact, but that's so behind in its truth and in its essence. So to associate that with spirituality in this sense is very rudimentary and very unintelligent, after all, because these now have been studied, proven, tested, and have been duplicated in many ways, and that work will continue to happen through esoteric psychology, through all of those things. And so we're seeing here in the same way in the University of Metaphysics is talking about it before. Academic communities used to frown upon metaphysics, but it's now been accepted because we can see as a fact, a verifiable fact, that ESP does in fact exist. And it's going to go on to say what ESP is. And a big case of this happening is with our own government, three-letter agencies, running these tests and doing ESP experiments and thought experiments where they're bringing people, psychic people, people that have a proclivity towards picking up on the collective unconscious, and doing tests where they're like in different rooms and they can look at an image and have another person here connect to that frequency and pull up the same image. And different kind of experiments like that have been very heavily used, and then they weaponize them, right? They use it for militant purposes, and then the masses aren't brought up to speed on the fact that these have been verified by science, right? So those people that are still connected to the previous hive mind that says, as an intellectual, I have to renounce everything that is spiritual, religious, or metaphysical because it is unscientific. They haven't really caught up to speed on so many of the advancements, or they haven't initiated their own inquiry, which is fine. But that's why, again, I don't really talk about it in those circles, because it's not about pushing our thoughts or our views on another. It's basically, what do they say, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. Because, there's been times where I knew that I wasn't ready for certain information. And to this day, there's still things that maybe I'm not completely comfortable with welcoming into my mindset. But once I've seen enough facts and once I've seen enough evidence to support it, then, I'm open to adopting it when that time comes. So I don't fault anyone on being behind. But it's very interesting when you're in circles that people are very kind of rude even to do the opposite. So they'll completely dismiss this. So as you go into this study, my recommendation is also to kind of just look for safe spaces, look for like minds, and rather than trying to push or convince, because this isn't a game of convincing, because whatever someone believes, right, is going to be true for them, because that's their truth at the time, because that's what they're attracting evidence and verification for, because that's what they're seeking at that time. And it'll kind of jive with this part if I continue on here. So I think I read this part. No, let's go right here. Metaphysicians have also taught how ESP affects the daily life of every human being on Earth through a constant exchange of ideas between people on a psychic level of communication. We're all communicating and interacting psychically all the time. And there's waves that are going through invisible waveforms in the air. That's what's transmitting our radio frequencies, our internet Wi-Fi signals, the channels on our cable TV. They're not being seen, but likewise our thought impulses are bouncing around all around. So there's this whole network of communication that is unseen, but is nevertheless there. So again, when we say woo-woo, something that is unseen is imaginary, that would be like saying that because the wind, you can't literally see it, that it doesn't exist. But until a tornado, comes flying through, or a big gust of wind and it knocks you off your balance, then, you have to recognize at some point that what is unseen or not really understood or known to you sometimes becomes something that you actually do have to pay attention to, and that there is power in understanding that, just like power comes from that gust of wind, I guess you could say. Psychical researchers continue to define this hidden sense. Their research supports the theory that all human beings have the capacity for ESP, which is super interesting, although some are born with more talent than others. This could be connected to the calcification of the pineal gland. Simply stated, whatever a person thinks on a conscious level of the mind enters into the personal subconscious or memory bank of the mind. Similarly, whatever is in the memory bank of the mind flows into what is called the psychic level of the mind. The psychic level is like a broadcasting station sending out thoughts on the same vibrational energy frequency as the nature of the thoughts. The same way as like the radio waves, or like that signal is being broadcast so that it can be picked up when you tune to that radio station. Same way with thoughts. And this is to illustrate the point. It says, just as every radio station has its own frequency, every thought and or emotion has its own energy frequency. A loving thought is one frequency of energy, while a hateful thought is another frequency of energy. A thought of poverty is one frequency of energy, while a thought of prosperity is another frequency of energy. And this section goes on to say, basically, that this is demonstrable in many ways. When a person has a mindset that is hateful, they'll attract other people who are hateful, or they're loving, they attract more love. Poverty, same thing, they attract more poverty, while someone who has a prosperity mindset will attract more prosperity. But a person who has a poverty mindset can get into a prosperity mindset by shifting their vibrational energy frequency. And not only will they attract more people that are that way, they will attract more circumstances and events that manifest and verify that frequency for them. That which is like unto itself is attracted. And so this is where all of that unseen comes into play, because we are interacting with it each and every day. So I think that what I'll do here is see if I can change the screen to show a little bit. Show some of the other tabs right here. So here's the Cambridge definition of woo-woo. I think that's, and let's play it. How do you say it?
Woo-woo.
I don't know if the recording is going to pick up the computer talking, but let's see if it's switched over yet. Okay, to say something is woo-woo means that it is based on false beliefs or imaginary things rather than reason or scientific knowledge. So this is why the person who is purely academic up until now has been very comfortable in saying that spirituality is completely woo-woo, because they say that it's based on false beliefs or something that's imagined. It's not something that's based on reason or scientific knowledge. This is what previously the field of metaphysics in terms of astrology, and everything has been considered a pseudoscience. A pseudoscience really has been defined as a system of thought or a theory that is not formed in a scientific way. And then I like to go deeper and say, well, what is science? Science is knowledge or careful study of the structure and behavior of the physical world, especially by watching, measuring, and doing experiments, and the development of theories to describe the results of these activities. So at the time, people weren't, well, you can't even say that they weren't. At the time where people decided that something was woo-woo or pseudoscience, they weren't doing experiments, documenting, or putting theories together in the same way that the scientific community was. But now you do have people that are absolutely doing that work and verifying these things. And like I said, the three-letter agencies are definitely doing their work and verifying that these things are true and working with them to do very powerful things, which is the same thing that is available to you if you wanted to go into that. I wanted to really quickly also explain that the belief that spirituality at this point is woo-woo is also a form of ignorance in terms of it's just simply a lack of knowledge, understanding, or information about something. You'll find that a lot of times those people, again, have never read a truly like a highly acclaimed metaphysical book, or they've read some of the trickle down, and there is a lot of gimmicky stuff out there, the stuff that's been kind of like commercialized, but that's not to say that there's no credence to anything. And this can be seen in one quick example in the work of Joe Dispenza. So he does these meditation, these huge collective meditations, and he does it in connection with the Heart Math Institute. And they put these electrodes on people's brains, and they have them go into these deep meditations, and they verified the exact moment where they play these brainwave flow musics, binaural beats and stuff that get people into the theta mind state. They've just studied that that's the mind state where people have these mystical experiences, and they've seen and documented people going into these moments, and then they meditate with an intention or a purpose, and they have some sort of breakthrough or some sort of healing experience or some sort of connection with that inner self or that mystical experience, he likes to call it, and they feel changed. And it's been documented and duplicated several times. So that's in many ways, that's like a scientific experiment right there that's giving credence to this. But even he's been criticized. Over here, I like this quote where he says, "We have a natural ability to change the brain and body by thought alone." And the thing with Joe Dispenza that's super cool is that he comes from being a chiropractor that hurt his spine, and he was basically essentially paralyzed. And he decided that he wanted to walk again, so he used his mind to heal his body, and because he had nothing else to do while he was in that state. And so he physically is a walking representation of the placebo effect. And that's another thing that I like to kind of pose to those intellects and those purely scientific people, is that these mystical healings, like the placebo effect, and people being given a pill that's not anything but a sugar pill, and their belief that they're getting some miracle cure drug and actually curing whatever that problem was that they thought they had, that ailment, that's a thing. That's a representation of the body or the mind healing the body and interacting in that way. So anyway, the Heart Math Institute is a research institute that is engaged in scientific research into the heart since the early 1980s. And they found that the heart has about 40,000 neurons similar to our brain cells. So again, just to say that there's science going on out there to verify a lot of these things. So it's very encouraging and very cool to see. Lastly, I'm just going to do this definition here, the hive mind. So we know what we're talking about when we talk about this. It's a collective, unconscious, analogous to the behavior of social insects, in which a group of people become aware of their commonality and think and act as a community, sharing their knowledge, thoughts, and resources. So in this way, a hive mind behaves like insects. You think of a beehive in the most common, what it's originated from, right? So bees behave and they work and they're busy and they're doing all their thing, and they make this huge honeycomb, and they're all doing their job to support the queen bee, which is the ultimate source of the hive mind that they work to support. And there is community, and they're all working together, and they have this commonality and shared goal, right? When you see this in humans, as above, so below, It can be very beneficial to a society, a culture, everybody working together towards a common goal. But where it becomes toxic is when you have like what in theosophy or metaphysics we talk about as like an egregor. This is a theosophy Wikipedia, but the same definition is on Wikipedia too, I think. So it's not the ultimate fact source, but it's just a quick one that I was able to find. An egregor, egregor. I've never said it like that. I say egregor. So learn something new there. I think I'm going to keep saying it the way I have been though. Anyway, it's a group thought form. So the thing about this metaphysical understanding of a group thought form, the dangers of it, much like the man who is attracted to the temptress to his own detriment, he knows that it's harmful. He's recognized that it's become detrimental to him rather than beneficial. He can become aware that he has been attached to a group thought form. Maybe society has said, this is the image of what is attractive, and put this in front of them and spewed that out, that thought form took on a mind of its own, much like what we see young girls duplicating and mimicking and making their bodies all to look like this uniform thing. And it's a thought form that has taken on a mind of its own. So this is where Gregor comes into play. It can be created either intentionally or unintentionally. A lot of times what we're seeing in society when we're talking about this artificial intelligence on the rise, this artificiality is on the rise in the same way as our physical bodies, how we morph our appearances, how we're doing all these things, moving towards more tech and less nature. It's this making something, making what is artificial more enticing to those that are connected on this thought form. And so there is some intentionality behind just a lot of it. When you rise to that next plateau of awareness, you can kind of loose yourself from these archetypes that have been designed for us and that are not beneficial to us. And this says but the thing that's tricky about these is that spirit essence or that hive mind then takes on a mind of its own where it can actually operate. And they say these magicians will do the work to create these on purpose so that it can then go on and then take shape and then control a mass or a group, because they act as if they are supporting this queen bee or this hive, and they just do it because they're swept into that activity. It's all very interesting, but it becomes an autonomous entity with the power to influence. A group with a common purpose, like a family, a club, a political party, a church, or a country, can create an egregor. For better or worse, depending on the type of thought that created it. So that's very interesting, the type of thought that created it. And we can see this play out again. A big, easy example is fashion, where you see different trends come and go, and people follow them, and it could be purely innocent. But it's like, we have a quick representation. So they're showing like Gen Z fashion right now is going to be something where, it's like, this is like, it's a fluid opportunity where you could wear this, I could wear this. It's like, I want to wear things that are different from what I've worn before. And so it's like a thought form that's been given a huger societal nod. You can say there's been a big movement towards identity and identity fluidity and things like that, and it's trickling down into the fashion and the way people are expressing themselves. And this is all going back to, all culminating to understanding that what we're really seeing is when, maybe jump back to the page, what we're seeing is, I think that was it right here. People's attitudes, opinions, and desires are reflecting these thought forms that are being kind of shared on a mass scale, and they're attaching to that and physically expressing themselves based on that. This is okay to an extent, but to the degree that we are not thinking about it consciously in any way, shape, or form, where there's no self-analysis, there's no reflection, there's no understanding about why we're doing something, it's when it can become a slippery slope. Again, like with the male who's swept into, and it's not just male, as a female could be attracted to a certain type, same way in the media or whatever it is, or someone who's, completely gender fluid or non-binary, same thing. Understand that you are not falling or not putting yourself under an umbrella that has not been analyzed by your own discernment and your own analysis and things like that. Make sure you check the facts. I love Ayn Rand's check your premises. That's one of the things that I love about her. And that's another great example. I love Ayn Rand as a philosopher. I resonate most closely with her and her philosophy. However, one of the fundamental principles of her philosophy is atheism, which I'm absolutely not. So I have not fallen into the hive consciousness or understanding of that philosophy, though I recognize absolutely some of the fruits and merits of it. And that's open to each and every one of us. So I thought that this was a really cool section of Dr. Paul Leon Masters' University of Metaphysics and the coursework. And I'm just going to keep on going on, and I'll check in a little further down the line and see where I'm at. For those of you that signed up recently or within the last year, I'm very interested to see where you're at and how you're liking it. Feel free to reach out and share, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks again for watching. Take care.